Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we want to welcome everyone to today's Monday Night Boost. I know it's been a tough time going on, not only with coronavirus, but with a lot of the things going on politically around the country. And we wanted to have an open discussion about some of these issues. And last week, for those of you who may have joined us, we spoke, a little bit about Islam's stance on racism and how we should be aware of it in our own lives. But we also felt that it's very important to speak to people in our community, speak to brothers in our community who may have experienced this. And, I know as myself, I have a very different experience from people from other ethnicities in our community and other races in our community, just based on the color of our skin. And it's unfortunate, but a real reality in this country. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our speakers tonight and have them tell us a little bit about themselves. And first, I wanted to start with Brother Dawood.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm reaching out and I'm really thankful to be here tonight and to share some of my experiences to hopefully create more awareness about some of the things that we see going on in today's world. This has been an incredibly different year. When we consider the global impact of the coronavirus and the global outcry of one man's death, I don't think any of us that are alive today have ever seen two things that have affected people all over the world, and everyone is witnessing that. Some people might say that, this is something, all of this outcry, it might be, not necessary, that it's an overreaction. And people, especially Black people, should be more patient. And hopefully tonight you'll get a chance to think about that for yourself, for the audience out there, the individuals, to think, what do you think? And do you think all of this is justified? Just to briefly mention, I was actually grew up during the time of the civil rights movement, and I saw a lot of different things, and I've experienced a lot in my life, both in the social setting, corporate setting, in the sports environment, things, different arenas that I've been involved in. And I can talk more about it, but I can always remember the time when I woke my father up to tell him that Malcolm X or Haj Malik Shabazz had been killed. And that's something that I always remember. And I was very fortunate to be a part of many different things, especially when it came to inclusion and civil rights and things of that nature. So I had those style of things happening around me as a young person, and that shaped my background. My mother and father were both college professors, and my sisters also very highly educated, in different fields of endeavor. And I've always been involved in the corporate sales environment, technology. So I've been a Muslim now for the last 20 plus years, and I've had the pleasure of, by Allah's mercy, of becoming a Muslim at the time of age of 40. And then that is, the greatest blessing other than being born is to be a Muslim. But I think that it's important for all of us as Muslims to understand each other's realities, because that is a commandment within the Quran. So hopefully we can touch on that and go into greater detail tonight.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Dawood, and thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. And, it's interesting. A lot of time when we think about reverts, we think about people reverting in their 20s or their teens. But, you reverted at a little bit of a later age, and that's when the Prophet ﷺ, around that age, that's when he got the guidance from Allah and became a prophet. So that just stuck out of my mind.
That's true.
That's
true, yeah.
So, Brother Ahmed, tell us a little about yourself.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, and I'm kind of following right behind my good brother Dawood there. My name is Ahmed Abdelaziz, and I was born Muslim. And alhamdulillah, my parents embraced Islam about a year before I was born, while they were both in college in New Jersey. And so my experience, I kind of got both folds of it, of Islam in America, and my race being a black man in America as well too. So my background is I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, very, very diverse, multicultural town. Obviously, there's an Ivy League university there, so that was my experience. I went to prep school in high school, and I went to a major four-year university, and then I got an advanced degree. And just like Brother Dawood and like my father before me, I'm still in corporate America. So I'm like a byproduct of initiatives that were put in place to grant folks opportunity. And not to say that everyone in my extended family has the same opportunity that I have, but my brother has his master's degree, my sister getting her doctorate from the University of Penn. Both my parents have their master's degrees, and I've had great opportunity because of the path laid before me. But what that does not take away in any frame of reference is the things that have happened as far as experiencing racism on various degrees, from maybe harassment to biases at the workplace to things just as easy as getting a cup of coffee. So I think that it's important to kind of look at all aspects so that it doesn't just happen to one type of person. It happens in so many different ways, in so many different places. So, alhamdulillah, I'm happy for this opportunity to kind of share my experiences, with the community at large, kind of look for ways that we can partner and Islamically look for a solution. Because I mentioned before that, alhamdulillah, and I know Brother Dawood knows this and Brother Yusuf does too. The only thing that can save us as human beings from this scourge and this disease of racism is Islam. That's it.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's so true, alhamdulillah. May Allah allow us all to be saved from this.
Ameen.
And Brother Yusuf, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Yusuf Hassan. I'm from New York. I'm a part of the Isa bin Miriam family. It's a wonderful mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal to allow me to be a part of this topic and discussion. Personally, I think it's well overdue. I think it's a necessary topic for us to have to speak about racism in and out of the ummah. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to allow this topic of discussion to be beneficial, not just to us, but for those who are tuning in, and allow us to have a better understanding from it, from a spiritual aspect and also a worldly aspect, so that we can not just move forward, but be better to understand better the plight of racism, not just here in America, but globally. And I ask Allah to allow us hikmah and understanding and everything that we say. And I hope that we could all benefit from this, inshallah.
Ameen. So I guess to start off, I know, but Ahmed, you mentioned that you experienced racism in your own life in something as simple as just getting a cup of coffee. So I think maybe it would be helpful for all of us to just maybe for us all to talk about kind of what you've experienced, maybe within the Muslim community itself and even outside of it, in terms of examples of racism that you've experienced that we, brothers and sisters outside of the Black community may not realize is going on.
Yeah. So, just to kind of set the table of that, I said it's a manifold process of all types of things. So I'll start with one of my earliest experiences. It actually happened when I was in middle school, and I had a new teacher. It was in sixth grade. I'll never forget this. And he was reviewing the lesson plan. And that community, as I mentioned before, most of my friends there, we had all gone to nursery school together. Black, white, Asian, it didn't matter. We were all together. We had known each other. Our families were very intertwined. Teacher told me that he had a special set of instructions for me because he had to give me his Black person's talk about Princeton, because we don't learn the same way that other folks do. We need more time with things and different considerations because we're not as smart as the other kids in class. So I couldn't even believe what was being said to me. I thought it was just completely crazy. And friends of mine looked at me. Some friends of mine couldn't believe what happened. They got up and walked out of the classroom, went to the principal's office. Just so happened that night was back to school night, and when I informed my father about what happened, you can only imagine what he wanted to do. And he, of course, confronted the teacher in front of everybody. And it turned, long story short, it turned into a process where there was, legal matters involved. Teacher ended up losing his job. But that was like my, one of my first in-your-face experiences. I kind of spilled over into getting a little bit older is I found myself in situations where people would think that I was there, in that environment, either doing some kind of manual labor or didn't belong in some place. So I had people ask me the most craziest questions. Like I'll be outside of my house mowing the lawn. They come up and say, when the person who owns the house here, can you give this flyer to them? Or what time would the person who owns the house be back? Just crazy things like that, spilling all the way over into, situations where I'd be at the job and people would make off the wall comments, not only about Islam, but also about, just my race. So it's just that there's no escaping this kind of situation where people make these false assumptions. And some of it may not have been deliberate, but some of it was. And that's kind of where you look at how malicious those words can be and how that kind of sticks with you. So what I say is that there's two different things going on here. There's the Black American racism, which I just kind of made mention of. Then there's the racism that we may have in regards to being Muslim. And that will start with just, if you're a Black American Muslim, well, hey, when do you revert? And taking that away from my brother Yusuf, my brother Daoud, that doesn't even matter. I could have became Muslim yesterday, and I'm still Muslim. But just asking that question because they think that there was no history of Muslims here is offensive. And that spills all the way over into people kind of thinking about you're somehow connected to a street culture, you have no family values, you shouldn't be married to a certain sister because of, this, that, and the other thing. So it's there. Its origins probably stem from a little bit of both, but my awareness has always been there. So that's kind of like a long-winded answer to question.
Brother Yusuf, Brother Dawood, have you, what are some examples of what, you may have experienced in your life?
Brother Yusuf, you go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bismillah. I'm 32 years old, so my experiences is started mainly from a very early teenager, growing up here in Queens, growing up in New York, mainly from police, to be honest with you. I actually remember one vivid incident where at the time there was a lot of drugs being sold in my neighborhood, and there was a police officer by the name of Officer O'Hagan, and he would drive. He was on like the bike patrol, so he would come through the neighborhood on the bike patrol, and he would talk to the young kids and speak to us, and he would always get us to try to get involved with him to kind of like get information from us. And for me, those experiences, I want to say they were somewhat kind of like tormenting because, here we have a young teenager, a young kid just trying to live life due to circumstances and surroundings. And here you got a police officer kind of like rejecting my youth and not allowing me to grow up and to just be me. But he somehow feel that I have some type of information from him. And, it's almost like he's given the impression that I'm supposed to, by default, have information about drugs and guns and violence. Never once did it occur to him to ask me maybe about schooling or, what do I want to be when I'm growing up. The stigma is automatically placed on me having information, violence, gang activities, drugs, and those things were kind of like tormenting growing up. And then even, like now, I'm Black. I'm Muslim first, but I'm also Black. And so it's like two stigmas on me. So it's like you're a Muslim and you're Black. So it's like two things composited on you, and it's a real difficult situation to navigate because Islam, for some people, out of ignorance, they attach Islam to misconceptions such as terrorists and things like that. So it's it's kind of a difficult battle to fight, both in the worldly life, and then, you know, Islamically, you know, it's difficult for me because a lot of Muslims, and I know we're supposed to think good of our brothers and sisters before we think harsh of them or bad of them, but it always occurred to me that they believe that, you know, because you're black, that your first introduction into Islam is through the Nation of Islam. And I think that that's such a harsh misconception for people to want to put on you, or you know, that you took your shahada in jail, or you don't know about the religion, or you don't know how to read Quran, or things like that. And I find that to be somewhat rooted in prejudice, racism, misconception, and it's real harsh, and it caused lots of problems. And I feel that a better way that we could help out is by those who have misconception, starting off with their families, and more importantly, starting off with their children, to allow to better educate them, and letting them understand that Muslims come from all walks of life, and that Muslims come from all different regions, and Muslims do not just have a distinctive look that comes from one particular ethnicity. And I think that that's a huge misconception, and it causes a really big division in the ummah. And I think one of the major problems today for us is racism. It's a huge, huge, huge thing, and it's very disheartening, you know, because, you know, before I really understood, you know, like after I got away from the dunya and understanding the worldly aspect of certain things, and then I came to Allah allowed me to become a Muslim. I thought that I escaped this prejudice, racism, and then I got like a wake up call. You know, I'm like, wow, it exists here too. And it was hurtful, it was painful for me, you know, and you know, I'm still trying to understand it better, and I ask Allah to allow me to be able to overcome this, and to move forward and look for new ways in which we can engage with each other without putting stigmas on each other.
And brother Dude, if you have any
Yeah, I would like to, you know, I would say that, you know, looking at my life and the things that I experienced, I'll frame it in a couple of different events. And the first, or I guess eras of my life, if you will. The first I would say is in the educational environment. I was a good student. I went to a very good high school. I was the captain of my basketball team, and I was looking to go to college because my family had gone to college. So in my household, it was unacceptable that if you weren't even thinking about going to college or thinking of graduating. But even that, with all that said, my coach, who, you know, claimed to love me as, you know, a player, and, you know, he always said, "Oh, you're a great student athlete." You know, he wanted me to go to some very small little school in the middle of nowhere that didn't offer, you know, much in terms of resources, and you know, really didn't encourage me. Not that I needed it per se, because I said I had my family behind me, but it was a little bit of a shocker because I thought he understood, you know, the type of person I was, and that I was fortunate to have the academic inspiration coming from home, and I would think that would have been built on. And then moving forward, you know, my class, my sister's class is 4 years ahead of me. She was in that first group of African Americans that went to major white colleges. And I think one of the things that most people need to understand is that these universities were really never designed for people of color. They're really, you know, even with affirmative action and everything, it was just a small percentage of people that they really wanted to come to these schools. So when we arrived on those campuses, we were basically on our own, and we had to fend for ourselves, and we had to develop self-help groups that would allow us to be successful. And I guess I've always been part of those type of efforts, starting from college. And, we had to deal with, and I went to school in Boston, so we had to deal with, people being attacked. We had to defend the African-American sisters to walk them home at night. We dealt with all of these type of things. And it was very tough, especially coming from New York, because in New York, we didn't, we're more of a melting pot here. And, no one really bothered us here. But outside of New York, it's very, very different. New York is not the world. When you travel, you realize that. So, moving on, I moved into the corporate environment. And once again, I got involved in, I came in through the company that I ended up joining through a self-help organization where many of the top executives who are African-American were our mentors. And we had the problems that we faced, but we also had the solutions, and we worked together to be successful. And many of those things shaped me as I went through time. So I've seen it historically. I mean, I know about the history, and the thing that I want to just convey is that, when you look at things that are happening now in the society, this is not an accident, and these things are not new. We are only 12 to 13% of the population in the United States, but we are 33% of the prison population. And there are 2.3 million people in the prisons. We have the largest prison system in the world. And we're overly represented, and there are a lot of organizations that are involved with equal justice initiatives to make to try to reduce that and to change that trend. But that is something that when Brother Yusuf talks about how he was treated on the street, that is all part of that whole reality that began after slavery and after the emancipation, moving into the early part of the 1900s, and it goes on and on. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of these things. As far as being a Muslim, alhamdulillah, I've had a very good experience. I can't say that it has been bad as far as a lot of racism, but there have been some instances because of mostly lack of knowledge, because most of the people that may come here who are not born here, they really don't know the history, and they images are very useful in shaping perceptions. And the images are mostly controlled by the media, movies, and things of that nature. So when you consider that, people generally look down on people, especially Black people, because of the imagery that you have out there, and it's very powerful. I happen to be married to a woman who's an educator from Pakistan, and when she was getting ready to come here, because I got married over there, one of the people she met, she was the headmistress of her school. They said, "Well, make sure you stay away from those Black people." Now, they never saw a picture of me. They didn't know who I was. But finally, when she explained that, she was actually marrying a Black person, that person just shrunk into their chair, and they were so embarrassed. But they felt very comfortable with that. And you have to ask yourself, how did that perception travel 10,000 miles away? How did that react? How did that become a de facto statement that might have shaped her decision? And our children are often asked, why did you, how did you marry from someone from another culture? And the thing that I would throw out to Muslims is that our children are growing up here, and the reality that they're going to face is the future of a multi-ethnic environment, and they're not going to be tied to any place other than United States, be it Brooklyn, Long Island, or wherever they're from. And their reality will be shaped by many things, but the parents have to be leaders in terms of helping them to understand their role so that they can begin to change this, so that we don't keep carrying these things into the future. And I can talk more about that, but that's just something that I want to throw out to everyone. I mean, including myself.
I think just a follow up with that is that I think the point both brothers are making, myself, is that entering when you're in Islam, we all know what the Quran says. We all know what the Hadith says about racism. We know who the first racist was. But then when you experience it, even though we all align on these beliefs, it kind of can be a very, shocking and surprising and sometimes frustrating situation, but we have to at the same time understand, like Brother Dawood said, kind of where these things come from. So as part of being, when I say indigenous people, because we're American, in some way, shape, or form, as far as, how our roots are established here. Question I always ask is, when someone's always asking me, well, when do you come into Islam? My question is, I usually ask, well, why are you here in America if you're trying to practice Islam? Now, I'm not taking anything away from anybody that came here as an immigrant, but just you look at circumstances, we were all brought here. Some folks left situations where Arabic is being spoken, where the Adhan comes on 5 times a day, or in Ramadan the whole month, everything shuts down, very easy to fast, and it's a different situation here. So at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why did you come to America? Did you really come to America for Islam? Did you come to America for something else? And understanding that reality kind of puts things to a better snapshot as far as, everybody on the same level. None of us are perfect, but, don't criticize me based off of some stereotype that you've seen or something you've read about. Let's all align on what we believe as Muslims, and let's try to better understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very, very important point. And I think one thing I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more is what Brother Dawood was talking about how, how did that kind of statement about being careful of Black people reach all the way in Pakistan. And I think even a lot of us here, I was also, born and raised in America and went through the public school system here. But even then, I don't think I had a great understanding of kind of the underpinnings of racism and why did this all come from, because I know, Brother Dawood, you lived through the civil rights movement and through that time, but that was a result of something that happened, we're talking about centuries ago. So maybe, maybe we can talk about how, kind of where this all started from, so we can all have a little bit more understanding of kind of why racism is here today, but really where did its roots really start from?
Well, I think I'll touch on that just to begin. There's 1619 is the date when the first slave ship came to America, and I believe that even before that, there were African travelers that came, and there's books that support that. But if we just look at that date, and we look at the long period of slavery, the most brutal form that ever, that we know of, okay, that, in history, that went on for a long period of time. And obviously we don't have enough time to go through all of that, and I'm not an historian, but when at a certain point, at the end of the 1800s, when the slaves were freed, we went from being property to being free. And if you think about that, most people had nothing. They absolutely had nothing. And that disrupted the economy, because when you have free labor for hundreds of years, imagine if all your employees were never paid for hundreds of years, how far ahead your corporation would be. So when people no longer were working for, as slaves, and they started to branch out, one of the first things that was done was to begin to criminalize people for any and everything, because that was like a form of retribution and a way of keeping people down. So subsequently, many people were, sharecroppers and basically still slaves for decades after that. Some even say up to, some families were even in that situation for another 100 years. And when you get into the early 1900s, there were certain people, amazingly, who were able to break out of the South, migrate to the North, and start to be self-sufficient. And when that happened, there was a backlash. And like, for instance, you probably know about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's interesting how all this is coming out now, and just at the right time. So where people, where the United States actually went in and terrorized the entire community. The government actually did that against the people. And so that was the first real terror attack in the United States. And so when you consider that, and then it kind of continues on through various administrations where, like Brother Yusuf was saying, they assumed he was involved with the drug business. Well, that was all because of the, during the years of, the 80s and the 90s, when people were criminalized and spent so many years for minor offenses for certain drugs, and then in certain white communities, they were getting off for selling other drugs. So this has just been something that's going on, and the prison system has morphed into what it is today, and it's almost expected that this is going to continue. And now we're seeing a backlash, and we're seeing that certain legislation is starting to happen, and that people might say that some of these things are not making any difference, but already, just in the last few weeks, there's been some success stories. There's Breonna's law was just signed in Louisiana, where they can no longer do no-knock warrants. 154,000 people made phone calls and got 26 people to agree to it, so that she, a person like her, wouldn't just be murdered in her apartment without a warrant. So there's been a lot of activity, and there's a lot of research and documentation about what we're talking about. But we want people to understand that regardless of your level of education, regardless of your level, you're always in jeopardy in this society. As an African-American Black person walking down the street, you're always in jeopardy by law enforcement or being falsely accused. And, alhamdulillah, we have the Deen of Islam that has the blueprint. We have the best blueprint. We have the Quran and the Sunnah. And if Allah blesses us with Hidayah, we can follow that. Then inshallah, we can make a change, and we should be on the forefront of that.
But Yusuf, Brother Ahmed, do you have anything else to kind of add on, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. You want to go? Or?
Yeah, I was just say quickly that not to give a whole history lesson, Brother Daoud said, but to the point of there was a couple of different factors that happened. There was socioeconomic warfare that was initiated on African American people. There was psychological warfare, and so when you couple all that together, and we're not saying that folks don't have choices to make sometimes in life that will put them down one path or another. But the fact of the matter is that if you do make a bad choice, the penalty that will be incurred upon you for just being Black in America is bad. So you have a situation where people were thought to be less than a human being. We're thought to have no value as far as their personhood, as far as their wealth and their property. And then you look at all the other things that Brother Daoud talked about, and you throw that together, and you have a situation that kind of just will erupt when people can't take anymore. So to the point. And this is what the point I want to make too. If you had a society that was based upon slavery, right? And just because there was emancipation, just like today, we had a society and our cars are based upon oil. And we said tomorrow, okay, everybody's gonna do electric cars. Would that change anything? It wouldn't change anything in one hour. So you look at where we came from, look at the decisions that were made, and there's still an unbinding process. And along the way, there's a lot of promises that were made to people about certain programs, certain land they'd be granted, certain economic status you'd be given. And every time it would happen, such as like Tulsa, somebody would come along and they would snuff it out. So we're seeing that repeatedly over and over again. We're seeing progress that gets made is taken away. And even when the economic impacts come, like the housing crisis that happened, that destroyed a lot of wealth for minorities. So it's a recurring cycle. So to understand that this is not something that somebody chose to do. No one chose to be in the situation they're in right now. There's factors that contributed to it, and there's factors that make it worse.
Very good.
That's definitely a great point. Brother Yusuf, do you have anything else you'd like to add, or something from your own experience?
Yes. Bismillah. I think that I want to add in that this notion that Islam is new to African Americans, like it's this new found. I just want to point out that 40% of enslaved Africans were practicing Muslims. I want to throw that out there. And they were practicing up until being, sold into slavery. They were still practicing. Some of them even went back home, went back to the continent. So is this notion Blacks have a long legacy of being connected to Islam, especially here in America. And I just want to point out that Islam is not this newfound religion to Black Americans, and that we play a very intricate part of Islam being here in America, specifically. So I just wanted to point that out, that Islam is not a new religion to us. 40, and this is factual, that 40% of enslaved brothers and sisters from the continent were practicing Muslims. It's a very large percentage. And I just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely, and I think a lot of us take that for granted. We always think, Muslim must came from Arabia and Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, and they're all brown. We don't realize, what kind of Islamic history we have here in this country from the Black community, and the Islam was here long before many of the brown community, the Dates community, and everyone else migrated here to the U.S. in the late 90s and whatever it was. Islam was here and driving for even before that. I think it's a very good point that many of us aren't aware of. So Jazakallah for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So I mean, so another thing that I found that it's also kind of what Brother Ahmed talked about is sometimes there's maybe not overt racism, but there may be more subtle kind of forms of racism that we don't see on an everyday basis. Like, for example, when I was in school, right, I didn't experience any of this. But then my friends who were Black would tell me later on, teachers would say things to them on the side, like, "Oh, you should be grateful to be here. We're kind of giving the impression that they're doing an honor by admitting them to, college and giving them this opportunity." And I think we've seen that as well with other instances in the NFL and stuff like that going on, that there's kind of undercurrent that, the Black community should be grateful for being given the opportunities, which, I think a lot of us who aren't in the Black community, we don't always see that. Some of you guys could talk a bit about that kind of more, that kind of subtle racism that's there on the ground that we may not experience.
It's some of it's too is based off of, you made mention of a social program. I kind of talked about, early on in this conversation, kind of how the evolution of that kind of affected how I am. So folks would have this misconception that, if you got into a prestigious school, if you had a good job, I think Brother Dawood had made mention of this, that you're just there because, there was a situation that happened with slavery, and then, we just want to put you in a situation to kind of right the wrong. And that's usually kind of it's the misappropriated baseline for understanding that. And the fact of the matter is, the way America works is, if there's building blocks off of one generation to the next, and we never had a building block, so to speak, from that standpoint. So when you found yourself in those situations, either in a medical school, in a business school, prestigious university, you had to really work to get there. And even if you were the best of the best student, they could just say that we don't have a spot for you for whatever reason. And sometimes it was trumped up with that kind of subtle racism that we'll talk about. And did get in, folks say, well, he's just here because of X, Y, and Z things. And folks always try. I switch. People would try to spot test me if I knew certain things because I was in a certain class. Just to make sure that I really belong there and I wasn't just put in there, for some situation. So those kind of things would happen. And what folks have to understand is that regardless of how hard the circumstances are, people fought very hard to accomplish what they accomplished today within society, being minorities and going through that struggle. So there's always a very interesting story to tell, from all of these different angles of how it happened. But the assumption is that someone just committed something because of what happened. And that in itself can be what we call that kind of versus racism. Someone just gave you a job because you're Black. Someone just gave you this opportunity at university because you're Black, not because you're confident enough to have it. And that's kind of like the deficit, to deal with, is that you don't deserve it. You just have it because somebody is gracious enough to give it to you. And that's kind of the origin of it. And I'll stop and let my two other brothers kind of speak to that. But that's how it's affected me.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And one thing that I always try to tell people, and if they engage into a conversation about whether someone is deserving of something, and compare us to any other group of people, we have fought in every single war. We fought on the Civil War on both sides. Okay, we fought in every battle. Vietnam, you name it. We're on the front line, down in the middle of it. And when it comes to these types of comments about patriotism, they don't apply because we have been there from day one. The first person who died in the American Revolution was Crispus Attucks, an African-American black man who died. So we have really nothing to prove from that standpoint. It's only the education that will develop people's ability to understand how the country was built and give everyone a better appreciation. And in reality, many companies and industries benefit in a very big way from Black culture and Black communities. And if you go into an office environment, pretty much people are talking about the basketball game, the football game, the latest record, the latest song, and but that's kind of like over there, but the people are kind of downtrodden, but on a regular basis the contributions are there, but it's kind of shielded from giving the respect that it deserves. So I think that it's just something that, again, I say, and I know we don't have so much time, but I would just say that what's helped me when I go to visit a place, I come to a country, I try to understand a little bit about the history. And one of the things that really shaped me was when the National Museum of African American History and Culture was built a few years ago. I had the pleasure of going there, and I would just ask, out there, how many people have gone to that museum? It's part of the Smithsonian, and it's free, and it's an amazing experience, and it walks you through so many things that would help you to better understand and to give you a greater appreciation for your fellow Americans and how this country was built. And I think that, taking advantage of those type of resources are, I think, going to have a big impact down the road. And I would say that whether you go to an Islamic school or whether you are in a home school or whether you're in a public school, pretty much most of this information is not going to be shared or learned by you. So parents have to take an extra step to make sure that their children actually are exposed to this and other information about other communities as well, to be a more global citizen and create the type of dynamic environment that is benefited by inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, we have to really make that extra effort to educate, first off ourselves, and then our children, our families, and then that's how we really grow. And alhamdulillah, we live now in an age of technology where there is so much access to different kinds of educational resources. Are there any documentaries or any books or anything like that you think may be especially beneficial for anyone out there who's listening and who may want to find out more and learn more about the history of the Black community in this country and how things are, and then from that a standpoint how we can change? Are there anything anyone would recommend?
Yeah. So I have an extensive archive, an extensive archive of books in African studies, Black studies, American studies. I can't give it off the top of my head, but what I'll do is I curate a small section of PDF files and documentaries that I would actually want to extend to our Muslim brothers and sisters from other communities, just to get a better understanding if they are ignorant about it. And to be ignorant is not a bad thing if you're willing to learn from your ignorance. So I think that if you're willing to learn from it, it's a bad thing. And I know that calling someone ignorant has a negative connotation because you look at it as being a harsh word, but it simply just means you're not knowledgeable about a particular subject or a particular topic. And that's okay. I'm ignorant to a lot of things. One thing I would also like to point out is that I'll add on to what you said, Brother Sam, and what the other brothers said, is that it starts with our family. It starts with our family. And I think that as parents, I'm not a parent yet, inshallah, but I think that It starts with us first, and then it's a trickle down. It goes to our kids, because let's be honest, we're not going to be here forever, and our kids is ultimately going to inherit what we left them back, whether it's good or bad. And the same things that they are taught are the same things that they'll continue to pass through generations, and these will be the things that plague the ummah. Generation after generation after generation after generation. And alhamdulillah, Allah Azza wa Jal gave us Islam. He gave us Islam. He gave us the Sunnah. He gave us the Quran. And that is the formula right there. Malik al-Hajj Shabazz said when he went over to Mecca, he said the first thing that he noticed, he said he found out what the formula and the antidote was to the race problem. He said it was Islam. And we can't, and I say this, I'm not saying that we can't be Muslim if we don't understand this, but we can't have Islam and say that, we're going to discriminate against a certain group of people. It's clear proof on what Allah is telling us that is a sin, is a huge sin, and that we should avoid it. And I think that we need to educate ourselves on this more. We need to be open to suggestion. We need to be open to other communities. We need not to be afraid. I love all Muslims. I think I get a better. I'm excited when I see Muslims. When I see a Muslim, I'm excited to see a Muslim. I love to see Muslim. I see someone that we both have La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. We both have the kalima. We both have, we're Muslim. And when I see that, I can only think good of my brother, of my fellow brother, of my fellow sister, and never negative. And I think that we want that to translate down into our family, because that's how we can combat racism as a community, as a whole. And alhamdulillah, I just want to say this lastly. Isa bin Miriam is a very diverse masjid. All the brothers and sisters there that I've ever met is warm, welcoming. I've learned from lots of the teachers there. It's a very diverse community that offer very beautiful programming to all communities, and that it also starts in the masjid as well. So I will say that Isa bin Miriam is a very diverse masjid. And many brothers and sisters from all different ethnicities come to the masjid, and you really get the sense of that on Juma. In Juma you see everyone together. So I ask Allah to allow us to be amongst those who are not ignorant, and to be among those who follow His way until the day of judgment.
Ameen.
Ameen.
I think too that also, when we talk about rectification of this matters, you asked about books, and there are several. The one thing we have to keep in mind is that, and I don't think anybody's come across that way on this forum, is that we're talking about equality and justice. And at the end of the day, I want to be treated just like everybody else. I don't want to be treated any different than anyone else, but I also don't want to be treated any better than anybody else. And so none of us on this panel, none of us are advocating for any kind of idea that's like what we call black nationalism, where you're saying that, hey, me as a black man, I'm gonna be better than everybody. So what the brother just made mention of is what the beauty of Islam is, because you can't be a Muslim, to your point, and say, well, hey, I'm tired of these white people, because you have brothers from the Caucasus Mountains. When I was in Saudi, when I made Hajj, made Umrah, I saw brothers from Dagestan, from Chechnya. They were white as white people, and you have brothers from the Sudan who are darker than all of us in this column. So there's that big wide spectrum. So when he's talking about what's going to rectify us, we have to rectify ourselves by what we all believe in, which is the Quran and the Sunnah. Not any kind of message that says, well, hey, I have to get mine because I'm a certain way. I have to look down on someone. Because just as a white person looks down on me for being black, I can't in turn do that. It's based off what we call taqwa in Islam, and that's God consciousness and your deeds. So that, as a brother made mention of, that all of us know, is that's what we have to align on for society purposes, to move ourselves forward, teach our children to try to remove this scourge, this disease, because it really is. It is a satanic disease to be racist and to think you're better than somebody because of your skin color or your image.
Yeah. Definitely, 100%. And kind of on that note, talking about erasing it and trying to get this out of our society, Brother Dawood, I wonder if you could share a little bit just from your perspective, having gone, from the civil rights time until now, what are some positives that you've seen in how things have been changing for the better in terms of how we're combating racism and maybe bringing more awareness to it?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen things change as much as I think they could or should, honestly. Obviously, there's been a lot of people that have been successful and moving forward, but I still think that, I mean, I'll just put it this way. If I look at over the last few weeks and I read about a lot of people who are, I guess, in the front line of different activities that are out there, there's some good feeling that things are going to change. And I think the amazing thing is that there's so many people out there that have just finally reached a point that they say, this is just not right. Someone shouldn't be killed like this. This is just not right. And I think that has a lot of potential. And I think that we have to build on that, because that means that, the goodness that is already inside of people is coming out. And that's when things begin to get better. So, you had asked about like some things books that you could read or movies. I'll just mention that one of the movies that I think would be very beneficial is a movie called 13th. 13th is about the history of the prison system and criminalization. Very good book to read. Just Mercy. It's a book and a movie. It's about a gentleman by the name of Brian Stevenson who runs the Equal Justice Initiative. Another book is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. These are all very well-documented books. And then a couple of other movies that I think of interest to people that would help them to understand some of the great things that people have done. One is called Best of Enemies. It talks about a civil rights activist who became very close with a KKK leader. And it's a true story. And then finally, Hidden Figures, which is, if you haven't seen that, that's a great movie that talks about how some certain African-American women were very instrumental in getting the first rocket ship to the moon based upon their mathematical calculations. So, I think that those are just a few. And then, finally, I would say that, when people ask, what can I do? What can I do? As Brother Ahmed says, nobody's looking for a handout or anything like that, but everybody has a sphere of influence. And there are organizations that are doing things to combat certain things that, are going on in the society, whether it be prison reform, education reform, police reform. And you may not be able to, join those organizations, but maybe you could donate, maybe you could advocate for those type of things. And then, of course, being with your children and role modeling that type of learning. And then finally, when it comes to like Masjid Isa ibn Maryam, alhamdulillah, I had the pleasure of being, one of the founding members of this masjid. And I know that it's always been built around that concept and always been a leader in this area. And I would just encourage the current leaders there, who I know well and respect greatly, to continue in that direction, as they have always done so. And this is an indication, just another indication of the way that the masjid has always been. And we ask Allah to put barakah and to unite us and to make us better Muslims. And if we become better Muslims, inshallah, then we can change the society.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
So I don't know, Brother Yusuf, but Ahmed, do you have any kind of closing remarks you want to say, or anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Brother Ahmed, you want to go first or no?
Yeah, I can go. I just want to say it's a good, it's a good starting point, and just to be optimistic. As Muslims, we have to be optimistic. So we all know, again, that having forums like this, having awareness like this, is not going to solve or eradicate the issue of race. In fact, we know from Rasulullah says that there are certain elements that will still be with the ummah, until the day of Qiyamah. That's what I think the Arab term is asabiyya, so that's nationalism, all right? But we have to maintain this one important matter that I've thought about. Does it frustrate me? Do I hate it? Does it break my heart sometime? Of course. But am I here to seek equal rights and perfection in this life? Or is my goal the perfection of the hereafter? Because inshallah, if we all make it to the Jannah, we're not going to be having any kind of racial disputes there. I'm not going to be being Pakistani or supposed to be white. So our goal in life is to make it to the paradise. And we do that by following the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, it's not going to be perfect. There'll be some trials along the way. But if we keep that in mind, and not to say we want perfection in this life, but we want the reward of Allah promises believers in the next life, that kind of makes the trials and the struggle you have to go through, there's a meaning to that as far as what happens next. So that's kind of the optimism that I wanted to share with everybody, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair for letting me be a part of this with these two great brothers, this great community. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Oh, yeah. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, brothers.
Jazakallah khair.
What do you say? Do you want to share before we wrap up?
Yes. I want to share that we have to crawl before we walk sometime. And I'll just put a note. I just put more emphasis on it. It starts with us first, for those who are parents, and then we pass it down to our kids. Make sure you make a lasting but positive impression on your children. We're not going to be here all forever. Neither are they. But they're the next generation of Muslims, inshallah. And what you pass down to them ultimately determines what take place moving forward. So please make a very conscious effort to try to be very open-minded and to teach your family and your children the correct way. And inshallah, we all could fight this together. I appreciate everyone for allowing me to be a part of this panel. May Allah reward us for this. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's input, and I think it's so important for us to all learn and grow from this. So may Allah allow us all to do so, and allow us all to eliminate racism in ourselves, in our families, our communities, and be an example for the rest of society, the rest of the world.
Ameen.
Ameen.
All right, Jazakallah khair, and everyone have a good night.
You too.
Good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.